It all started at a networking event, downtown, one of those sterile hotel ballroom affairs with bad coffee and overly bright lighting. I was there trying to make connections, feeling a little lost if I'm honest. And he found me. He had this easy smile, a firm handshake. He said he'd heard about my work, admired my approach. It felt genuine. We ended up talking for an hour, skipping the next seminar entirely. He laid out this vision, this partnership, where we'd combine our strengths. He called it a synergy. He said we'd build something neither of us could alone. It wasn't just business. He framed it as a friendship. We started having lunch once a week. He'd ask about my family, share stories about his kids. He made me feel seen, understood. It was a perfect facade. The verdict came down in my favor, a complete victory. The judge used words like breach of fiduciary duty and fraudulent conveyance. The judgment was for the full amount plus penalties and legal fees. On paper, I had won. People congratulated me. My lawyer was thrilled, but walking out of that courtroom, I felt nothing. Hollow. He was ordered to pay me back. But the law couldn't order him to feel remorse. It couldn't force him to understand the damage, the betrayal. The money was a number, the trust he burned. Me with their finances, their dreams. They saw my wealth not as a barrier, but as a guarantee. If a man like Robert is involved, they'd say, you know the money is safe. And I would smile, this warm, generous smile I had perfected. And I would feel the weight of that trust like a medal on my chest. The access was total. I remember sitting in our little office, the one above the library, looking over the spreadsheets. The columns of numbers represented summer lunches, for kids' heating bills, for seniors' emergency rent subsidies, to keep families from eviction. I had the passwords, the checkbooks, the authority to approve expenditures. The scheme was so simple. It was almost elegant. I didn't need to carry out sacks of cash. I just needed a few fake invoices, a roofing repair for the community center that never happened, an overpriced bulk order of supplies from a shell company I'd set up. The money would leave the foundation's account, and after a few silent digital detours, arrive quietly in my own. I told myself it was temporary. Alone, the market was down. I had a liquidity problem. A few investments had turned sour. I would pay it all back before anyone noticed. I was just moving numbers around. The needs of the charity felt abstract, but the pressure from my creditors was a constant ringing phone. The unmasking didn't come from a forensic audit. It came from Sarah, the volunteer bookkeeper. She was a retired schoolteacher, sharp as a tack, with a devotion to the foundation that was almost holy. She loved the work, the direct line from donor to recipient. She noticed the invoices, because they had no soul, no detail. A real invoice has a story, a grease stain, a phone number scribbled in the corner. These were sterile, generated on a computer. She was curious, not suspicious at first. She called the roofing company, listed a number that led to a disconnected line. She dug a little deeper, cross-referencing dates, and found that the community center roof had actually been repaired 6 months earlier by a different contractor. She brought her concerns to me, her face creased with polite confusion. I remember the cold dread that washed over me, so intense I thought I might be sick right there. I patted her hand, my own feeling like a block of ice. Don't you worry, Sarah, I said, my voice unnaturally calm. I'll look into it. Probably just a clerical error from the vendor. I saw the doubt in her eyes, the teacher who had caught a student in a lie. The scandal broke like a dam. It wasn't a front-page story at first, just a small piece in the local paper. But then it was on social media. The algorithm of outrage did its work. A millionaire stealing from a charity. The headlines wrote themselves. Local philanthropist accused of embezzlement. Oakwood founder betrays community trust. My photograph was everywhere, the same one they used for the Chamber of Commerce awards. My smiling face now looked like a grotesque mask. The community response wasn't just anger, it was a pure hot contempt. My phone didn't ring with support, it was a torrent of fury from numbers. I didn't recognize my reaction. Was a pathetic pantomime. First denial, a press release from my lawyer calling the allegations baseless and defamatory. Then excuses. I tried to muddy the waters, talking about complex financial instruments, administrative fees. But the evidence was a straight line. And Sarah was an unimpeachable witness. The apology, when it finally came, was hollow. I stood at a podium, my words scripted, talking about errors in judgment and a difficult personal period. I couldn't even say the words. I didn't say I stole from children. I said I failed to uphold the fiduciary standards expected of me. The silence in the room after I spoke was heavier than any booing. The legal outcome was almost an afterthought. My lawyer was expensive and good. I paid full restitution, every cent plus fines. I got probation. No jail time. The judge said the financial punishment was severe enough he had no idea the real sentence began the moment I walked out of the courthouse. The social exile was absolute and meticulously enforced. I went to Luigi's, the Italian place I'd been going to for 20 years, the owner Giovanni, who always greeted me with a bear hug and a complimentary. Was something else entirely. The victory felt like ashes. Glass of wine simply looked through me. He seated me in the back near the kitchen doors. And the server, a young woman I'd watched grow up, could barely look at me. The meal was silent, punctuated by the stares from other tables, the hushed conversations that would stop. When I glanced over, I saw the Hendersons' old golfing buddies see me and literally turn and walk out the door. My wife tried to brave it for a while. But the whispers at the supermarket, the other mothers pulling their children away from ours at the bus. Stop, it was too much. The shame wasn't just mine, it was a stain on my entire family. My son stopped going to soccer practice. My daughter deleted all her social media accounts. In a fit of desperation, I tried to repair the irreparable. I thought money could still talk. I made a huge public donation to the new children's hospital wing. It was a transparent bribe. And everyone saw it as such. The editorial in the paper the next day was titled "Blood Money Won't Buy Redemption." They called it an attempt to purchase a conscience. The contempt that followed was even colder, more sophisticated. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was a deep-settled revulsion for the sheer clumsiness of my attempt, for my failure to understand that some things are not for sale. The money I had always seen as a tool, a solution, had become useless. It was just paper numbers in an account that everyone now knew were tainted. The Oakwood Family Foundation, to its credit, didn't collapse. The community rallied around it with a fierce protective love. They organized fundraisers that broke all previous records. The local paper ran a story about Sarah, the volunteer, who saved the charity, and they published photos of the new programs funded by the outpouring of support. It was a lesson in true generosity, a stark contrast to my transactional selfishness. My story became a cautionary tale told in business ethics classes and whispered at charity galas. I was the ghost at the feast, the example of what happens when greed poisons goodwill. Now I live in a gilded cage. This house, which I built to be a testament to my success, feels like a prison. The high walls that were meant to provide privacy now just underscore my isolation. The marble floors are cold. The silence is immense. I can look out the window and see the town carrying on without me, the lights in the houses. At night, the sound of a distant lawnmower on a Saturday morning. Life goes on. My money is still here. I have more of it than ever, since I have nowhere to spend it and no one to leave it to. Who would want it with my name attached? It's a constant mocking reminder. It can buy comfort, but it can't buy a conversation at the coffee shop. It can buy a new car, but it can't buy a friendly wave from a neighbor. It can build a mansion, but it can never ever build back the respect I tore down. The price of my hypocrisy isn't measured in the fines I paid, it's measured in the absolute, unbreakable silence that surrounds me, a silence so deep that not even the chime of a bank notification can truly penetrate it. The glow from my monitor was the only light in the room. It was late, the house was quiet, and his voice coming through my headphones felt like the only real thing in my world. He called himself Atlas, said he was carrying the weight of financial knowledge, ready to share the load. His YouTube channel wasn't flashy. It was just him in what looked like a home office, talking directly to the camera. No fancy graphics, no hype, just a calm, steady voice, explaining blockchain market cycles, risk management. It felt authentic. After the judgment, he did what people like him do. He paid the settlement. It was a significant sum, but he paid it. And then he tried to move on. He started a new consulting firm with a vague, uplifting name. He had a new website with stock photos of diverse people smiling around a conference table. He gave a few interviews to trade publications talking about resilience and innovation. He even made a show of donating to a local children's hospital. It was a full-scale reputation laundering. Felt like he was talking just to me. He built it slowly. It wasn't an overnight thing. It was months of consuming his free content. Every video felt like a personal lesson. He'd say things like, "I know this seems complex, but stick with me. We're building a foundation here." And I did. I took notes. I started with a tiny amount of money, following his basic advice. And it grew. It felt like magic. But he made it feel like logic, like a science anyone could learn. He wasn't selling a get-rich-quick scheme. He was selling education, empowerment. That's what made it so believable. Then came the invitation and email personally addressed from his team. "We've noticed your engagement," it said. "Atlas has selected a small group for an exclusive webinar." It felt special, like I'd been chosen. The webinar was the next step. The tone shifted just slightly. It was still him, still that calm voice. But the subject was different. It was about a unique market opportunity. A window, he said, was about to close. He talked about a fund he was managing personally, a chance to pool resources for investments that weren't available to the public. He showed charts. He used terms I didn't fully understand. But he made it sound inevitable, profitable. And the testimonials, they were the final piece, people with screen names and blurred profile pictures. But they sounded real. I was skeptical too, one said in a clip he played. But after joining Atlas Mastermind Group, my portfolio has grown by 300 in 6 months. Another talked about quitting their job, about financial freedom. It all fit together. The free content built the trust, the webinar created the urgency, the testimonials provided the social proof. It was a funnel, and I was sliding right down it. The mastermind group was on a private platform. It had a forum, a chat, and a portal for making your contribution to the fund. The buy-in was substantial. It was my life savings, every dollar I'd scraped together from years of work. But the numbers he presented made it seem like a bargain. The projected returns were astronomical. I remember my hand shaking over the keyboard. When I entered the amount, I had to confirm it 3 times. There was a moment of pure fear, a cold knot in my stomach. But I thought about his voice. I thought about the calm, rational way he explained everything. I clicked the button. The money was gone. A confirmation screen appeared. "Welcome to the inner circle," it said. I felt a surge of excitement. I'd done it. I was in. For about a week, everything was fine. The group chat was buzzing with excitement. Atlas posted daily updates, little messages about market movements, about how our fund was positioned for success. He was more active, more personal. It felt like we were all in this together, a community. Then the updates became less frequent. A day went by with no word. Then 2 people started asking questions in the chat, polite at first, then concerned. "Is everything okay, Atlas? Can we get an update?" The messages went. Operation. He was trying to buy back his standing, to write a new chapter, and hope everyone forgot the last one. Unanswered. The silence was the loudest sound I've ever heard. It started as a low hum of anxiety in the group. Then it turned into a roar. Someone noticed the Telegram channel we used for urgent alerts had been deleted, just gone. A few hours later, the entire private platform went offline. Error 400. For the website didn't exist anymore. My heart just dropped. It felt like the floor had vanished beneath me. I must have sent 100 emails to the support address. All bounced back. I tried to find his personal social media. Everything connected to the Atlas brand had been wiped clean. The YouTube channel with hundreds of videos was set to private. It was a digital ghost town. He had vanished into thin air. The reality didn't sink in. Slowly, it hit me all at once. I was sitting in the same chair in the same dark room, but everything was different. The money was gone, all of it. The savings for a house, for security, for a future, it was just gone. And I had given it to him willingly. I felt a physical sickness, a nausea that started in my gut and rose up into my throat. I was a ghost staring at a blank screen. Desperation makes you do strange things. I started Googling frantically. Atlas crypto scam. Nothing. Then I tried variations. Atlas fund disappeared. And that's when I found it, a Reddit thread. The title was just his name and a question mark. I clicked on it. The first post was from a user. "Has anyone heard from Atlas? The platform is down." The comments were a waterfall of horror stories. Dozens of them, hundreds, people from all over the world telling the same exact story. I just lived the free content, the webinar, the mastermind group, the life savings transferred, the silence. We had all been in the same boat, and he had sunk it for all of us. That Reddit group became our refuge, our war room. We were a collection of the betrayed, the ashamed, the angry. We shared screenshots of our transactions. The emails Wed received, the last messages he posted in the chat. Piece by piece, we built a case. We realized the testimonials were fake. The profiles were created just days before the videos were made. Someone found a voice modulator pattern in one of the testimonial clips that matched a publicly available software. We were amateur detectives bonded by our shared loss and rage. Then the internet sleuths arrived. These weren't victims. These were digital bloodhounds. They loved the puzzle. They started digging into the metadata of the images he used on his website. They analyzed the background of his videos, zooming in on reflections in his glasses, identifying a unique building through a window blur. They cross-referenced everything. They found a name, not Atlas, his real name was Kevin, from a suburb I'd never heard of. They found his LinkedIn profile from a previous life. As a Middleville accountant, they found his real social media accounts, pictures of him with his family on vacations. They uncovered everything. He had a past history too, a small-scale scam from years ago, settled out of court, that none of us had found in our initial excitement. The illusion was completely shattered. The guru was just a man, a criminal. The truth has a way of seeping out. It started subtly. An old client of his would run into a colleague of mine and mention offhand how they'd never work with him again. Then came the online reviews, not on his site, of course those were curated, but on industry forums in anonymous comment sections. The stories would appear, details that matched my experience. Exactly, the pattern was recognizable. The community, our professional community, has a long memory. Conversations at conferences would quiet when the story went viral. It had all the elements: a charismatic online figure, a massive scam, a group of victims banding together. A popular commentary channel on YouTube did a deep dive video, The Fall of Atlas, how an internet guru stole millions. It got millions of views. Then another channel covered it, and another news websites picked it up. His real name, his face, his history, it was everywhere. For a moment, it felt like justice. The internet had caught him. The mob had spoken. The comments on those videos were brutal. People called him every name imaginable. They mocked him. They threatened him. His digital footprint, once so carefully crafted to build a brand, was now a permanent record of his crime. I thought that was the end of it. The story faded from the headlines. We victims tried to move on as much as anyone can after a loss like that. The legal process was slow, complicated by international borders and the nature of cryptocurrency. But the internet never really forgets. A few months later, someone posted a link in our Reddit group. It was a new channel, a financial advice channel, focused on, of all things, ethical investing. The host used a different name, but he had a soft, deliberate way of speaking, a certain cadence to his sentences. It was his voice. Someone had recognized it instantly. They'd isolated the audio and compared it to an old Atlas video. It was a perfect match. He had grown a beard, he used different lighting. But it was him, Kevin, trying to reinvent himself. The comments section on his very first video was a graveyard. Within hours it was flooded. Isn't this the Atlas scammer? Everyone look up Kevin last name and Atlas scam before you listen to a word. This man says, how dare you show your face again? The video had a few hundred views, but thousands of comments. It was taken down within a day. His entire digital presence was scrubbed again. But that's the thing, it doesn't matter. His name is poison now. If you Google him, the first 10 pages of results are about the scam. The wiki we created is the third result. The news articles are there. The YouTube exposés are there. His reputation is not just damaged, it's a permanent stain. He can change his name, he can move, he can try to start over. But the digital record is forever. Someone somewhere will always recognize him. A comment will always appear. A warning will always be sent. He is forever trapped in the story he created. The internet gave him a platform, and it gave him a prison. He can never outrun what he did, because we wrote it down. We saved the receipts. And the crowd, the vast, unforgetting digital crowd, will always be there to remind him. He thought he could disappear into the noise. But the noise has a perfect memory. His brand is forever tarnished. And in a world that lives online, that's a life sentence. There's no parole from the court of public opinion. The truth is his anchor, and it's dragging him down forever. It started with a feeling, a low hum in the back of my mind, that I couldn't quite silence. For 20 years I'd been part of the fabric of Omnicorp. I knew the rhythm of the place, the sound of its engines. I was a senior compliance officer. My job was to understand the flow of money, to make sure it moved in clean legal channels. I was good at my job. I was loyal. I believed in the company. Or at least I believed in the idea of it. The work we did, the people who showed up every day. I trusted the system. Walked into the room, invitations to speak on panels dried up. He was being judged by a court that had no formal procedure, but whose verdict was far more final. But the feeling persisted. It was in the small things, the details that didn't line up. A payment to a vendor we'd never used before, an amount that was just a little too round, an expense report from the CEO's office for a consulting fee that had no supporting documents, no contract. You'd bring it up in a meeting, and you get a smile, a pat on the back. Don't worry about that one, Sarah. It's handled, special project from the top. And the subject would change the first few times you accept it. You assume you're not in the loop. But the pattern kept repeating. The special projects multiplied, the amounts got larger. Then there was the behavior, the executive retreats, that seemed more extravagant each quarter, even as we were told to tighten our belts. The new private jet, the way the CEO Arthur Vance would talk about shared sacrifice in an all-hands meeting, while wearing a watch that cost more than my annual salary, it was a dissonance, a crack in the perfect corporate facade. I started keeping a separate file. Not officially, just for my own peace of mind. I'd flag the odd transactions, make a note of the excuses. It was a collection of anomalies, a constellation of red dots, that on their own meant nothing, but I began to see a shape forming. Smoking gun wasn't a single document, it was a chain. I was doing a routine audit of a subsidiary, a small tech firm. Wed acquired. The numbers were a mess, I had to dig deep. And I found a series of transfers. They were clever, layered through 3 different shell companies, but they all led back to the same destination: a private equity fund based in the Cayman Islands. And the name on the fund's board of directors was an alias, but one I recognized. It was the name of Arthur Vance's college roommate. Guy, he still played golf with. Every summer I followed the money. It was like tracing a vein of poison back to its source. Millions of dollars siphoned away from product development, from employee pensions, from shareholder value, all of it flowing into a black hole with Arthur's fingerprints all over it. I remember sitting at my desk, the glow of the monitor, the only light in the office. The hum was gone. It was replaced by a cold, still silence. The truth was right there, in black and white. It was no longer a suspicion, it was a fact, and it was terrifying. The decision to speak up wasn't a moment of heroic clarity. It was a slow, grinding torture. My mind became a battleground. On one side was loyalty to the company that had given me a career, loyalty to my team, people I'd worked with for decades. What would happen to them? If this came out, the company could collapse, their livelihoods would be destroyed. And what about my own family, my mortgage, my kids' college funds? Arthur Vance was powerful, connected. He could bury me, he could make sure I never worked in this industry again. He could sue me for defamation. The fear was a physical weight, a constant pressure on my chest. But the other side was quieter, more persistent. It was the voice that said, "This is wrong." It was the memory of my father, a simple man who believed a person's word was their bond. It was the look on the faces of the junior analysts I mentored, who still believed in the rules. If I stayed silent, I was complicit. I was helping him paint over the rot. I was betraying the very principles of my job, of my own integrity. The contrast became starkly clear. He had paid his legal debt, the court was satisfied. But his social debt was unpayable. He had money, a nice car, a big house. But he was isolated. He was the guy you might take a meeting with out of curiosity, but you'd never ever partner with. You'd never trust him with anything important. His money became a kind of prison. It allowed him to maintain the appearance of success, but it walled him off from the genuine connections that make a career and a life meaningful. I started gathering evidence in earnest. It felt like a spy thriller, only there was no glamour. It was just fear and a sickening sense of betrayal. I used encrypted drives. I took pictures of documents with my phone. When no one was looking, I reached out to an old law school friend who specialized in whistleblower protection. Her first words were a bucket of cold water. "Are you ready for your life to be turned inside out? Because that's what will happen. They will come after you with everything they have." I told her I had no choice. The day I filed the report with the Securities and Exchange Commission was the longest day of my life. I walked out of the federal building feeling hollowed out, like I'd left a vital organ behind. The waiting was agony. Then it broke. The internal announcement came from the board. An external investigation has been launched into certain financial practices. The office, which was usually a hive of noise and activity, went dead quiet. You could feel the shockwave move through the building. And then the looks started, the whispers. I was a ghost at my own desk. My phone didn't ring. My inbox was empty. The isolation was immediate and absolute. I was now the problem, the disloyal one, the person who had rocked the boat. Fallout was a public spectacle. It was on the news every night. Omnicorp CEO accused of massive fraud. Arthur Vance held a press conference. I watched it on the screen in my living room. He stood at a podium, his face a mask of wounded pride. He called the allegations outrageous lies, fabricated by a disgruntled, mediocre employee. He said he would fight them with every resource at his disposal. He looked directly into the camera, and I felt a chill. He was talking to me. It was a declaration of war. The investigation unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. the stock price plummeted trading, was halted. The board, initially defensive, started to turn on him as more evidence emerged. The shell companies, the secret accounts, the inflated revenues. The narrative shifted. The media, which had first portrayed him as a titan of industry under attack, now circled like vultures. The headlines became more savage. The house of cards crumbles, Vance's empire of lies. The moment of true vindication came during a congressional hearing. Arthur was under oath, being questioned by a sharp, relentless senator. He was repeating his denials, his voice growing tighter, more strained. And then the senator held up a document. It was an email, one I had found from Arthur to his golf buddy, the one on the board of the Cayman Islands Fund. The subject line was Project Phoenix. The body of the email was short: another 5 million. Transferred. The pigeons are cooing nicely, let's keep the feed coming. He was asked to explain what the pigeons were. He stammered. He looked at his lawyers. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. In that moment on live television, everyone saw it: the greed, the arrogance, the sheer contempt for the people who trusted him. His reputation, carefully crafted over 30 years, evaporated in an instant. The company did collapse. It filed for bankruptcy. Thousands of people lost their jobs, their pensions. It was a tragedy. And I carry the weight of that. I lost my job too. I was let go with a small severance, a quiet suggestion that I should disappear. But the evidence I provided was the foundation of the case against him. It was all true, every bit of it. Was wealthy yet profoundly bankrupt. In the end, the legal outcome felt almost secondary. He cut a deal. He pleaded guilty to a few charges, paid a massive fine, and got a short sentence in a minimum security prison. He'll be out in a few years. He still has money. He probably hid plenty of it. On paper, he got off easy. But that's not the whole story. The true punishment wasn't the fine or the prison time. It was the complete and total destruction of his name. Arthur Vance is no longer a respected businessman. He's a punchline, a cautionary tale. When people hear his name, they don't think of success or power. They think of theft, deception, betrayal. His children have to live with that. His name is mud in any industry that requires trust. He's a ghost in the world he once ruled. No amount of money can buy back your honor. No private jet can fly you away from that kind of shame. I had to start over. It wasn't easy. I took a job at a small nonprofit. The pay is less, but the work is honest. I sleep at night. I lost my career, but I kept my integrity. He kept his money, but he lost everything else. His legacy is a stain. Mine is the truth. And in the long run, I know which one matters more. The victory wasn't in seeing him handcuffed. The victory was in the silence that followed the storm, the quiet knowledge that I had done the right thing, no matter the cost. His money meant nothing, because he had to live with the man he saw in the mirror every morning. And that man was a thief. I have to live with myself too, and I can. The concept was so simple, so elegant. I still remember the exact moment it clicked into place. I was on the subway watching people struggle with their umbrellas, a tangled, dripping mess every time the doors opened. And it hit me: a universal docking system, not just for phones, but for everything. A single magnetic interface built directly into bags, car consoles, office desks, coffee shop tables, a port for power, for data, for everything. I called it the Nexus Link. I spent months on the details. The schematics were meticulous. The business plan wasn't just a document. It was a vision. I mapped out the entire ecosystem, from licensing the tech to hardware manufacturers, to the software platform that would manage it all. It was airtight. It was going to change how we interact with our devices on a fundamental level. And I made the mistake of sharing it. His name was Julian. He was more than a colleague. He was a mentor. I trusted him implicitly. We'd have these long lunches where I'd talk about the future, about building something real. He'd listen, his eyes sharp, nodding, asking the perfect probing questions. I thought he was helping me refine it. I thought he was on my side. I sent him the final draft of the proposal one Tuesday evening. His response was enthusiastic. "This is brilliant. Let's meet tomorrow to discuss the next steps." Tomorrow came and went. No meeting, no call. My texts went unanswered for 2 days. When he finally resurfaced, his tone was different, distant. He said he'd been swamped with a family emergency. I believed him. I felt guilty for even bothering him. A month later, he resigned, on a lifetime opportunity. He said he needed to move fast. We had a drink for his send-off. He clapped me on the shoulder and told me to keep chasing my dreams. I remember feeling a little sad, but also hopeful for him. My own rebuilding was slow. I had to start over from a financial standpoint. It was hard, grinding work. But the real rebuilding was internal. I became wiser, more cautious. I learned to trust my instincts, to see the difference between a partner and a performer. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was rebuilding something real brick by brick. With the scars of the experience making me stronger, he was just applying a fresh coat of paint to a rotten structure. Then 3 months after that, the news broke: a new startup, Connexus, had emerged from stealth mode with a revolutionary universal docking technology. The founder and CEO was Julian. The tech was my tech. The name was a cheap knockoff of my name for it. He filed the patents the week after I'd sent him the documents. He used his connections, his own savings, and my life's work to launch himself into the stratosphere. I was paralyzed. I called lawyers. They were sympathetic, but clear: a protracted intellectual property battle against a well-funded startup. It would cost millions. I didn't have it. Would take years. The odds were not good. It was my word against his. And he had the prototype, the patents, the momentum. I had a notebook full of sketches. And a broken heart I had to stand by and watch. I had to watch him on stage at tech conferences being hailed as a visionary. I had to read the magazine profiles about his genius, his bold insight. Every headline was a fresh cut. The success was built with my bricks, and he was living in the mansion. The next few years were a strange, bitter purgatory. Connexus exploded. They signed deals with every major laptop maker, every car company. Julian became a billionaire. His face was everywhere. I'd be walking through an airport and see his smug smile on a magazine cover. I'd turn on the TV, and there he was giving a TED talk about the power of connectivity. It was a constant dripping torture. I threw myself into other projects. I started a small consulting firm. It was successful enough, but it felt hollow. The anger was a cold stone in my gut. But that anger fueled me. It made me relentless. I was determined to build something that was entirely, unquestionably mine. I focused on niche software solutions, building a reputation for integrity and deep, thoughtful work. My company grew slowly and steadily. It was built on a foundation of truth, not theft. And you could see the cracks beginning to form in Julian's empire. The stories started to trickle out. He was impossible to work for. A micromanager with a vicious temper. He cycled through executives. Every few months he'd publicly humiliate engineers in meetings. The culture at Connexus was described as toxic and driven by fear. His arrogance was no longer seen as confidence. It was a liability. He started making reckless decisions, pushing the technology into applications it wasn't ready for. Just to beat competitors to market, he was building a house on sand, and the tide was coming in. The first major tremor was the smart home initiative. He pushed a version of the dock for household appliances, ovens, refrigerators. You name it, it was rushed. The security was laughably weak. A blogger exposed it. A teenager could hack into your Connexus-enabled oven and turn it on remotely. It led to a small fire in a test home. Nothing catastrophic. But the media pounced. Connexus, a security nightmare. Then came the recall, a voluntary recall of millions of units. The cost was astronomical. But Julian, in his hubris, doubled down. Instead of taking responsibility, he went on the attack. He blamed saboteurs and fear-mongering journalists. He sued the blogger for defamation. It was a catastrophic misstep. The public sentiment turned against him. Overnight, he looked less like a visionary and more like a bully. Then the real avalanche began. A whistleblower from inside Connexus, a senior engineer he'd fired, came forward. She gave an interview to a major newspaper. And she didn't just talk about the toxic work environment. She had emails, she had documents, she laid out the entire story of the Nexus Link, my story. She detailed how Julian had taken my concept, my designs, and presented them as his own. The article was a bombshell. It wasn't just a business failure anymore, it was a scandal. I saw him one last time about a year ago at an airport. He was sitting in the first-class lounge, staring out the window at the tarmac. He looked older. He had all the accessories of success, the expensive watch, the tailored suit. But he looked utterly alone. There was no one sitting with him, no one to talk to in that moment. I understood the unpayable debt. The law could return the money, but it couldn't force anyone to trust you again. It couldn't buy you a single moment of genuine respect. A reputation isn't. Story of betrayal. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The lawsuit I could never afford was suddenly filed by his own shareholders. They accused him of fraud, of misleading them about the origins of the company's core technology. The SEC launched an investigation. His board of directors turned on him, forcing him to step down as CEO. The valuation of Connexus plummeted. His personal fortune, evaporated in weeks, as stock prices collapsed. The media that once adored him now feasted on his carcass, the rise and fall. A fake genius hubris brings down tech titan. I watched it all unfold from a distance. There was no joy in it, it wasn't schadenfreude, it was a grim, quiet sense of closure. The universe had balanced its books, the lie he built his life on had finally crumbled under its own weight. My own company, meanwhile, had quietly thrived. Wed just landed our biggest client, a testament to the real durable relationships id built. A reporter called me for a comment on Julian's downfall. I declined, I had nothing to say to him, the truth was out, that was enough. The moral was clearer than any I could have written. Julian had the money for a time, he had the fame, the accolades, but he never had the character to hold it. The greed, the arrogance, the entitlement that allowed him to steal my idea were the same flaws that made him incapable of true sustainable leadership. He was a parasite, and when he consumed his host, he had nothing left to sustain himself. My success was slower, harder fought, but it was mine. Every client, every line of code, every milestone was earned. It was built on a foundation that couldn't be shaken. He had the temporary win, the flash in the pan. But I had the integrity, and in the end that was the only currency that mattered. His destruction wasn't an accident, it was an inevitability, a karmic equation that finally resolved itself to zero. He didn't lose because of bad luck, he lost because he was never truly meant to win. The house built on sand will always, always fall. The first red flag was so small I almost dismissed it. A payment was a week late when I called him. He was so apologetic, he said it was a bank error, a glitch in the system. He had such a reasonable explanation that I felt foolish for even worrying. Then it was a contract amendment that looked different from what Wed discussed. He said his lawyer had suggested the changes for clarity, that it was just legal jargon, nothing substantive. He had an answer for everything, but the answers started to built on contracts and bank balances. It's built on integrity, on doing what you say you'll do, on being a person of your word. And once that's shattered, it's the one thing that all the money in the world can never truly restore. He took all my money, but he lost something infinitely more valuable. And that was a judgment no court could ever overturn. I want to tell you about my brother, my little brother. There was a time when that phrase, my brother, meant everything to me. It meant a shared bedroom, a fortress we built from couch cushions and blankets. It meant whispered secrets after the lights were out, promises that felt unbreakable carved into the dark. Our parents, they raised us on a steady diet of loyalty. They'd say friends will come and go, but your brother is for life. You protect each other. You are each other's first line of defense. It wasn't just advice, it was our family's constitution. It was the air we breathed. When they passed, first Mom, then Dad a few years later, it was brutal. It left a void you could feel in your bones. But we had each other. That was the anchor. The will was simple, straightforward. They weren't wealthy people, but they were careful. They'd spent their lives building a small sense of security, a little nest egg, the family home. It was all to be split cleanly down the middle, 50-50. Their final wish was that it would be a foundation for our families, for their grandchildren, a continuation of the legacy they'd worked so hard to create. We stood at the funeral side by side, and we promised them and each other that we'd honor that. At first that's what it felt like we were doing. He started taking more of an interest in the paperwork. He'd always been better with numbers than me. He'd call and say, hey, just dealing with the probate lawyer, it's a nightmare of red tape, I'll handle it, don't you worry. And I didn't worry, why would I? He was my brother. He'd say things like, we need to be smart about this, make our money work for us. He talked about investments, about not letting the assets just sit there. It sounded responsible. It sounded like he was being the good son, the prudent brother. There was a new intensity to him, though a sort of impatience. If I asked too many questions, he'd dismiss my concerns with a laugh. Trust me, he'd say. And I did. Trusting him was like trusting my own heartbeat. The call came on a Tuesday morning. It was from a probate lawyer, but not the one I thought. We were using. His voice was professional, cautious. He said he needed to clarify some details about the transfer of the house's title. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, that my brother was handling all of that. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he said very carefully, Mr. Davies, according to the records, I have the property was signed over solely to your brother's name 3 months ago. Your signature is on the quitclaim deed, relinquishing your interest. I felt the floor tilt, my signature. I never signed anything like that. The lawyer, hearing the confusion in my voice, grew more concerned. He started asking more questions about bank accounts that had been closed, about a small investment portfolio my father had that was now listed under just one beneficiary. The pieces started to click into place, with a sound like bones breaking. The urgency, the secrecy, the constant reassurance it wasn't prudence. It was a calculated, methodical dismantling of my feel rehearsed. The delays became more frequent. The explanations grew vaguer. I'd ask a direct question about a financial statement, and he'd pivot to talking about our next big project, our future success. He was always painting a picture of a future so bright it blinded you to the cracks in the present. Inheritance. The confrontation was the worst part. I drove to his house, the papers the lawyer had faxed over shaking in my hand. He answered the door with a smile that vanished. When he saw my face, I didn't yell. I was too numb. I just held up the papers and asked him quietly what he had done. And the change was instantaneous. The brother I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger with a hard face and defensive eyes. He didn't deny it, not really, he just started justifying it. He said I was too sentimental, that I would have let the money sit in a low-yield account, that he'd made a bold move for both of us. When I pointed out that it was only for him, he shifted. He said I had always been the favored one, that our parents had given me more opportunities, that this was just balancing the scales. He accused me of ingratitude. Can you believe that after stealing from me? He was angry that I wasn't thanking him for the privilege. There was no guilt, not a shred of remorse, just a cold, entitled anger that I had dared to uncover his secret. The fracture in the family was immediate and absolute. Word got out. My wife was devastated, not just by the money, but by the betrayal. His wife was caught in the middle, but she stood by him, choosing to believe his twisted version of events. Holidays, which were always at our house, just stopped. The silence was deafening. Birthday parties for the cousins became impossible. Our children, who had grown up as close as we were suddenly pulled apart by this ugly chasm. The family phone chain, the group texts, the summer barbecues, it all evaporated. The unity our parents had built over a lifetime was shattered, in an instant replaced by a silent, bitter rift. The financial impact was real. It wasn't just about the money, but the money mattered. The security my parents wanted for me, for my kids' college funds, was gone. My wife and I had to put off plans. The stress of it was a constant weight on my shoulders. We had to recalculate our entire future, tighten our belts in a way we never anticipated, but that was nothing compared to the emotional toll. I was grieving all over again. I was grieving for my parents, and now I was grieving for my brother. The boy I shared a room with, the man I thought would always have my back, was dead in his place. Was this greedy, hollowed-out stranger? The anger was a fire in my chest, but underneath it was a sadness so profound it felt like a physical illness. I'd catch myself remembering some stupid happy moment from our childhood, stealing cookies from the jar, building a go-kart that barely worked, and the memory would curdle. The loss was twofold. I lost the future my parents planned for me, and I lost my past, because now every happy memory was tainted by what he did. What about him? What was his victory? He got the house, he got the money, he lives in the home. We grew up in a house that now must feel like a museum of his own disgrace. He lives with a wife who I hear is growing distant. His children, my nieces and nephews, they're old enough to ask questions. Why don't we see Uncle anymore? Why is everyone so sad? How does he answer that he has to look his own children in the eye and either lie to them or admit that he stole from their uncle? He's isolated the friends we. The moment of discovery was quiet. It wasn't dramatic. I was at my desk, going over the monthly accounts. I logged into the business bank account, our shared account, the one that was supposed to hold the capital for our major expansion. The balance was zero, not low zero. I remember refreshing the page, thinking it was a mistake. I checked the transaction history. There was a single large transfer, outdated 2 days prior, to an account I didn't recognize. My hands went cold. I tried to call him. It shared have mostly drifted away from him. They know everyone knows. So he sits in that house, surrounded by the spoils of his betrayal, and he is utterly alone. There is no apology that can fix this. Even if he showed up tomorrow with every last penny, the damage is done. The trust isn't just broken, it's pulverized. You can't glue the pieces back together. The family gatherings won't magically reassemble. The looks across the dinner table would always be filled with the ghost of what he did. The money was just money. The real thing he stole was our shared history, our mutual respect, the unspoken understanding that we were in this life together that's gone forever. The lesson is harsh, but it's clear when you steal from family, the debt you incur isn't financial, you don't pay it back with dollars, and since you pay it with your own history, you pay it with your future, you pay it by sacrificing your place at the table, your name in the family story. He thought he was gaining an advantage, a head start, but he was actually mortgaging his soul. In the end, he made a trade. He traded his identity, as a son, as a brother, as an honorable man, for a temporary pile of cash, and a house that will always be filled with the echoes of what he lost. He has to wake up every single day and be the man who betrayed his own blood. I lost money, and that hurts. But he lost everything that ever truly mattered. He has to live with that. And I think in the quiet moments in that silent house, that must be a punishment far greater than anything I could ever wish upon him. The first time we met it was in a coffee shop that smelled like burnt beans and ambition. We were both young, or young enough to feel immortal. I had the technical know-how, the product blueprint. He had the charm, the connections, the silver tongue that could convince anyone of anything. We sketched the business plan on a napkin. It wasn't even a proper napkin. It was one of those flimsy brown recycled ones that disintegrate if you look at it too hard. But on it we built a castle in the air. A handshake sealed it. No lawyers, no complex contracts, just a shared belief that we were going to conquer the world. Those first 2 years were a blur of caffeine and code. We worked out of my garage because the rent was free, the floor was concrete, and in the winter our breath would mist in the air. We'd order pizza at 10 p.m. and argue over features until 2 in the morning. It wasn't work, it was a mission. We were a perfect machine. I built the engine, he sold the dream. And he was brilliant at it. He could walk into a room of skeptical investors and walk out with a term sheet. He had this way of making you feel like you were part of something historic, something inevitable. And then it happened. We landed the Vandelay account. It was the one, the contract that moved us from a scrappy startup to a serious player. I remember the day we got the call. He put the phone down, looked at me, and just started laughing. We both did. We went from a garage to a real office with a view. We hired people, good people, smart people, who believed in our vision. The reputation we built was pristine. We were the golden boys, the ones who did things the right way. We paid our invoices early. We went straight to voicemail. I texted him nothing. I drove to his office. It was empty, a vacant space, with a few pieces of discarded furniture. The lock on the door had been changed. That was the silence that hit me hardest, the complete, utter silence, the friendship, the promises, the shared vision. It had all just evaporated, leaving behind that stark, zeroed-out number on a screen. Treated our employees like family, or at least I thought we did. The first sign was so small I almost dismissed it. It was a line item in the quarterly expenses, a software subscription fee that was about 15% higher than it should have been. I mentioned it to him. He clapped me on the shoulder, that familiar, easy grin on his face. Inflation, my friend. He said, everything's going up, don't worry, I'll look into it. And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my partner. We'd built this from nothing. But then the signs kept coming. They were like tiny cracks in a dam. A client paid up front for a year of service, but the money seemed to vanish into the operating account. Without a trace, he bought a new car, a Porsche, not just any Porsche, a limited edition, one, a necessary expense. He told me, we have to look the part when we meet with the big leagues. He started taking business development trips to Monaco, to St. Bart's. The expense reports were creative. I'd question them, and he'd get defensive. You handle the code, I'll handle the clients, he'd say. And the tone was new, it had an edge to it. The mutual respect was starting to feel like a one-way street. I was the mechanic, he was the driver, and he was driving awfully fast. The dam didn't break slowly, it exploded. It was our third-year audit. We were preparing for another round of funding, a big one. The auditors were thorough, as they always are. I got a call from the lead accountant late on a Thursday. His voice was calm, too calm. We need you to come down to the office. He said, there are some irregularities. Irregularities. That's the word they use before they tell you your life is over. I sat in a sterile conference room under fluorescent lights, as the forensic accountant laid it out slide by slide, transaction by transaction. It wasn't a 15% overcharge on a software subscription. It was a systematic, sophisticated scheme he'd been running for almost 2 years. Fake vendors, inflated invoices, ghost employees on the payroll. He'd been siphoning money into shell companies. Accounts with names I'd never heard of. The numbers on the screen were so large they felt abstract. But the accountant made them real. He had traced the down payment on the Porsche, the apartment in New York. His wife surprised him. With the vacations, it was all there: our company's money, our employees' salaries, our future. He had stolen it all to fund a lifestyle I couldn't even comprehend. The confrontation was anticlimactic. I showed him the report. There was no denial, no dramatic scene. He just looked tired. He slid a single sheet of paper across my desk. His resignation effective immediately. It got away from me, was all he said. Then he stood up, walked out of the office he'd never really earned, and left me holding the bag. The bag was empty. The fallout was a special kind of hell. The scramble to save the company was like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a thimble. The news broke fast. The Golden Boys were tarnished. Investors demanded their money back. Lawsuits piled up like dirty snow. The worst day was the day we had to lay off the staff. I had to stand in front of 50 people who had trusted us, who had turned down other jobs to be part of our dream, and tell them it was over. I saw their faces, the confusion turning to anger. Betrayal. They had mortgages, kids in college. Their trust was the final thing he embezzled. The first thing I did was hire a lawyer, a good one, a pit bull. She told me to gather everything, and I did. I spent days, weeks pulling together every email, every text message, every bank statement. It was like assembling a jigsaw puzzle of my own betrayal. And the picture it painted was so clear, so deliberate. The friendly emails, where he'd reassure me about the cash flow timing, were right next to the bank records, showing he was siphoning money into his personal account. The text message wishing the company didn't just stumble, it was vaporized. We filed for bankruptcy. The legal consequences are still ongoing: lawsuits from investors, from clients, from the people we had to let go. The public shame was a stain that wouldn't wash out. Business journals that had once praised us now ran postmortems about the dangers of a lack of oversight. I lost more than a company. I lost my reputation, my standing. I was the guy who was too naive to see his partner was robbing him blind. About a year later, I heard he was back. He'd used the money, what was left of it after the lawyers, to start something new, a venture capital fund of all things. He bought a sleek office in a better part of town. He hired a PR firm to scrub his online presence. The website for his new fund was all stock photos of diverse teams, high-fiving, and words like innovation and disruption. He thought money could talk, and it can buy a lot of things. But it can't buy a reputation back. The industry has a long memory. I heard the whispers. A friend would call me. Did you hear? He tried to get a table at the annual tech gala. He was politely declined. Another would text me a screenshot from an industry forum. Is anyone else wary of this new fund? From the guy who sank Atlas Partners. The comments were a graveyard of his ambitions. Stay away, known quantity fraud. He'd show up at a conference dressed in a $5,000 suit, trying to work the room, and the room would work around him. People would see him coming and suddenly find a pressing need to be on the other side of the hall. Former colleagues, men and women wedged shared pizzas within that cold garage, would turn their backs. They wouldn't partner with him. They wouldn't take his meetings. His name became a blacklisted keyword in investment committees. His new brand was dead on arrival, because the founder's name was a synonym for betrayal. The money was there, but it was stagnant. It was trapped inside a prison of his own making. He could spend it, but he couldn't use it to build anything real, not ever again. I, on the other hand, had to start from zero. There was no stolen fortune to cushion my fall. I started a new consultancy. It's small, just me and 2 other people who believed in second chances. We operate with a level of transparency that is almost pathological. Every client can see every line of expenditure. There are no partners. There is a board of advisors. There are checks and balances I should have had in place a decade ago. The lessons were hard, but I learned them. I am rebuilding brick by painful brick. It's humble, but it's honest. It's mine. And that's the legacy of his greed. 2 diverging paths. I lost everything material, but I kept my name. I can walk into a room, and people might remember the scandal, but they also see someone who took the hit, who stayed, who is trying to do right. He kept the money, the cars, the empty apartment, but he lost his name in business. Your name is your currency. It's the capital that matters more than anything in a bank account. He bought himself a temporary luxury, a few years of fancy vacations, and fast cars, but he sold his professional soul to do it. His reputation is a different kind of bankruptcy. It's a Chapter 11 for the spirit, and there's no court in the world that can discharge that debt. He's financially comfortable, but professionally paralyzed. He's a ghost in the machine. He wanted to rule, he can't rebuild. Because the foundation is pure rot every time he tries to lay a new brick, the whole world remembers what lies beneath the ultimate cost. Wasn't the collapse of our company, that was just a symptom, the ultimate cost was the permanent sign. Mia happy birthday was timestamped an hour before he initiated the final emptying transfer, seeing it all laid out like that it was no longer a personal hurt, it was evidence it was a cold hard case. He hung around his own neck, a sign that reads do not trust, and in business that's a life sentence. It started with coffee, a simple spill actually. He bumped into me at the counter, my latte, going everywhere mostly on his expensive-looking coat. He just laughed, didn't get angry, didn't seem annoyed, he insisted on buying me a new one. And then since we were both now late on buying me lunch to make up for the ruined morning, that was his opening move, charming, disarming, perfectly executed. The whirlwind after that felt like something out of a movie. He was so attentive he remembered everything, my favorite flower, the song I hummed, that first day, the story I told about my childhood fear of thunderstorms. He listened, in a way no one ever had. It wasn't just hearing, it was absorbing. He'd mirror my hopes back to me. I'd mention I dreamed of traveling to Italy, and a week later he'd have a folder of potential itineraries, not as a promise, but as a shared dream. He talked about our future with such certainty, a house, a life built together. He seemed successful, confident. He had an answer for everything, a vague but impressive-sounding job in consulting that involved frequent travel, which explained the sometimes unreachable hours. It all felt so real. He was a master craftsman, and I was the raw material he was shaping into his perfect partner. Love wasn't just an emotion, it was his weapon, and he wielded it with precision. The financial part started small, so small, it felt insignificant. We were out for a fancy dinner, his suggestion, and when the bill came his card was declined, a banking error. He said, flushed with embarrassment, he'd sort it tomorrow, could I just cover it tonight? Of course I could, it was a fluke. Then it was his car payment, a temporary cash flow issue, because a client was late on a big invoice, just a loan to tide him over a few $1,000s. He paid me back the first time, that was the hook to prove his honesty. The next loan was bigger, and the repayment was slower, accompanied by a story about a complicated investment. Then came the suggestion of a joint account for our future. He said to make things easier, to show our commitment. It felt like a step forward, a tangible sign of our intertwined lives. Round this time, my friends started to voice concerns. They said he was too perfect, that things were moving too fast. He was subtle about it. But he began to isolate me. He'd get a little hurt when I wanted a girls' night. He'd say he just missed me too much, that our time was so precious. He framed my friends' caution as jealousy. They didn't understand the connection we had. He made me feel like I was choosing between their skepticism and our profound love. I chose us. I pulled away from them little by little. The moment of truth was a Tuesday. I was buying groceries. My card was declined. That was strange. I used another, my main credit card, also declined. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I went home and logged into my bank account online. The screen loaded, and for a moment I thought it was a mistake. The numbers were wrong. My savings account, the one I'd been building for years, was zero, a zero balance. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process it. I checked the transaction history. 3 large transfers over the past week to an account I didn't recognize. The joint account we'd opened. I navigated to it, also empty. My credit cards were maxed out with cash advances. I called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. I texted nothing. I drove to his apartment. The key he'd given me didn't work in the lock. A neighbor saw me and asked if I was looking for the previous tenant. He'd moved out over the weekend, said he was relocating for work. Previous tenant. The words didn't make sense. I stood there in that legal process was a slow grinding machine. Filing the lawsuit felt like a declaration of war. Then came discovery. We demanded documents, and his side produced them, but they were full of omissions, redactions. Then came the depositions. Sitting in that room across the table from him was surreal. He had the same suit, the same haircut, but the smile was gone, replaced by a carefully neutral mask. His lawyer did most of the talking, but when he was forced to answer under oath, his story started to fray. He'd hallway, the world tilting on its axis, the perfect illusion shattered, and all that was left was the hollow, chilling silence of his absence. The immediate aftermath was a special kind of hell. The debt collectors started calling. Within days, the first time the phone rang with an unknown number, I answered thinking it might be him, with some insane, explainable reason. It was a man with a gruff voice, asking for payment on a credit line. I didn't even know I had opened accounts in my name. Explaining the situation to my family was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. I had to sit there and watch the pity and the unspoken judgment in their eyes. I saw the questions they were too polite to ask. How could you be so stupid? How did you not see it? I was asking myself the same things, a constant screaming loop in my head. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I felt like a cautionary tale, a headline. The legal process was its own form of torture. Filing the police report was like reliving the betrayal in sterile clinical detail. The detective was kind, but his questions were blunt. How long were you together? When did you give him access to your accounts? Did you ever actually see his place of business? Each answer felt like an admission of my own gullibility. The investigation was slow, a glacial pace that contrasted violently with the speed at which my life had been dismantled. It felt less like pursuit and more like paperwork. The feeling of violation was profound. It wasn't just the money, though that was terrifying enough. It was the intimacy of the theft. He hadn't stolen from a stranger. He had stolen from within the confines of what I believed was a sacred trust. He knew my fears, my dreams, and he used that knowledge to pick the locks. Grappling with the emotional wreckage was the hardest part. I'd lie awake at night replaying every moment, every touch, every whispered promise. Had any of it been real? The time he held me when I was sick, the way he cried during a sad movie. It was all a performance, a transaction. I was not a person to him. I was a mark, a resource to be exploited. Rebuilding my self-worth felt impossible. How could I ever trust my own judgment again? My instincts had been screaming at me for months, and I'd silenced them. With the fairy tale he was selling, I had to learn from scratch what was real. I had to find a version of myself that existed before him, and she was hard to find under all the rubble. About 6 months later, I got a message from a woman. I didn't know her name was Sarah. Shed found me through a mutual friend's social media. She said she thought I should know. She was dating a man named Mark, the same name he'd used with me. Her story was my story, the whirlwind romance, the charm, the vague job, the small financial favors that were starting to get bigger. My heart hammered in my chest. He had a pattern, a trail of broken hearts and emptied bank accounts. I wasn't an isolated incident. I was a chapter in a repeating story. It was somehow both validating and devastating. I did some digging with a cold, focused determination I didn't know I possessed. I found him. He was in a new city, a few states over. His social media, under a slightly altered name, was a gallery of his new life, pictures of him with Sarah on a boat at fancy restaurants. He was flaunting it, the lifestyle, the happiness. It was all funded by deceit, by my savings, probably by other women's trust. He looked happy, carefree. That was the salt in the wound. He had simply moved on to the next source, leaving me. Contradict an email he'd sent. He'd claim not to remember conversations we'd had just months before. I just sat there watching the facade crack under the weight of sworn testimony. It wasn't a confrontation, it was an unraveling. To clean up the wreckage he'd left behind. But then karma began to stir. Sarah and I started talking. Then we found another woman through an online forum for fraud victims. The three of us compared notes, dates, amounts, methods. We put together a timeline of his predation. We decided we wouldn't be silent. We shared our stories not with rage, but with cold, hard facts. We tagged him. We tagged his new friends. We provided evidence. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The comments on his pictures turned from congratulatory accusatory. His new shiny life began to crack. I saw posts from people asking if the rumors were true. I saw Sarah post a public message detailing the lies and the stolen money. His profile went private. Then it disappeared altogether. His attempt at a fresh start was evaporating under the harsh light of exposure. His new life crumbled as his true identity was revealed. He was a ghost, but we were giving him a shape, a name, a history that everyone could see. My own healing has been slow. It's been about finding strength in the mere fact of survival. Every bill I pay down, every dollar I save back into that empty account is an act of defiance. It's a message to myself that I am reclaiming what was taken. Financial recovery became a form of self-love. It was me proving to myself that I could rebuild what he broke. Learning to trust my judgment again is a daily practice. It's in the small things, trusting a friend's advice, listening to that little voice in my gut. It's not perfect, but it's getting stronger. And I think about his sentence. The police might eventually catch up to him, but that's not the punishment. I think about his sentence is the life he has chosen. He is forever a fugitive, not just from the law, but from authenticity. He will always have to look over his shoulder. He will never know what it is to be truly known to be loved, for who he is, because he has no self to offer. His word is worthless. His love is a lie, a currency he mints to deceive. He is condemned to a life of surfaces, of quick escapes and shallow connections. He will always be the villain in someone's story. The final analysis is simple, and it's what allows me to sleep at night. He stole my money, it was a significant amount, and it set me back years. But he condemned himself to a far greater poverty. A poverty of the spirit. He has to wake up every day and be himself. He has to look in the mirror and see a con artist. I have to look in the mirror and see a survivor. He broke my heart, but hearts can mend, and they can learn. He broke his own soul, and I'm not sure that's something you can ever fix. He took a lot from me, but he gave me something too, though he never meant to. He gave me the ruthless clarity to see that, in the balance sheet of the heart, I ended up with the only asset that truly matters, the truth. For years I was a statue in the town square. The bronze wasn't on the outside, of course. It was in the handshakes, the nods of respect, the way my name was spoken at committee meetings. It sounds ridiculous, but I believed it. I believed I had earned that statue. I'd built a successful business from nothing, a hardware store that became a chain. And I made sure everyone knew that my success was the town's success. I sat on the board of the Oakwood Family Foundation, me, a man who started out stocking shelves they trusted.